The day the world changed for the Carson family began in the soft gray light of early morning. Outside, the winter air clung to the edges of the windows, frost feathering across the glass in delicate patterns. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of pine from the tree that still stood in the corner, dressed in silver ornaments that caught the first hints of daylight. Zeus lay sprawled across the thick rug, his black and tan coat gleaming faintly even in the dim light. His ears twitched at every distant sound, the creak of the floor upstairs, the hum of the heater, the faint rustle of Nova shifting positions near the front door. Nova was the more cautious of the two. Where Zeus met the world head-on, confident and bold, Nova moved like water, quiet, observant, always calculating. Her dark eyes flicked toward the stairs every time a floorboard groaned. They had been restless all morning. Something in the air had shifted, subtle but undeniable. They didn't understand the exact nature of it, but their instincts told them change was coming, and they had learned to trust their instincts. Upstairs, Sarah Carson cradled the tiniest bundle she had ever held. River, just over 6 pounds, her skin still flushed from the warmth of the hospital. Sarah's husband, Mark, leaned close, brushing a fingertip over their daughter's cheek. "You ready?" he whispered, though the question was more for himself than for Sarah. Sarah smiled faintly, tired but glowing. "Let's go introduce her to the rest of the family." Downstairs, Zeus's head shot up at the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Nova stood, tail lifting slightly but not wagging. They moved together toward the base of the staircase, as they always did when their humans descended, a quiet honor guard waiting for orders. But when Sarah and Mark rounded the corner, carrying the small car seat, everything changed. Zeus froze mid-step, nostrils flaring. Nova tilted her head, ears forward. The scent was new, unlike anything they had cataloged before. Warm, milky, faintly sweet, a living scent, fragile, precious. Sarah knelt slowly, speaking in the soft voice she always used when calming them after storms. "This is River." Zeus took one careful step forward, his massive head dipped low, until his nose hovered just above the baby's toes. He inhaled slowly, committing every detail of her scent to memory. Nova followed, her movement almost reverent. The baby stirred, making a soft, breathy sound. Nova's tail twitched once. Zeus leaned closer, then glanced up at Sarah with an expression she swore she could read. "She's ours now." There was no bark, no leap of excitement, no jostling for attention, just an unspoken shift in the air, as if a silent contract had been signed. From this moment forward, they would watch over her, always. That night, Sarah woke at 2:13 a.m., to River's soft cries. She moved to rise, but paused when she heard another sound, the low, almost inaudible padding of paws. Peeking into the nursery, she saw Zeus standing between the crib and the door, his body angled protectively. Nova was at the crib's side, her chin resting gently on the rail, eyes half-lidded but alert. Sarah stepped closer. "It's okay," she whispered. Zeus's gaze flicked to her, then back to River. He didn't move until Sarah reached into the crib, lifting the baby into her arms. Only then did he step aside, slowly, as though handing over his watch for the moment. From that night on, their positions rarely changed. Every nap, every feeding, every quiet moment in the nursery, the shepherds were there. Even when they slept, it was the light, restless sleep of sentinels. Weeks passed, and River's scent became as familiar to them as their own. She was theirs, and they were hers. What the Carsons didn't know, not yet, was just how far that silent vow would one day be tested. The days after the rescue felt like a blur, as if the world had been thrown into fast forward while her heart still lagged behind, trying to catch its breath. The German shepherd, now known to the entire town as Shadow, became more than just the dog who had saved her life. He became a symbol of hope, loyalty, and the mysterious, unspoken bond between a human and an animal who has chosen them. Everywhere they went, people stopped, stared, and whispered. Some smiled warmly, offering thanks to the dog. Others just watched silently, as if they were seeing something sacred they didn't dare disturb. News crews showed up, cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward, but she barely heard the questions. Her mind replayed that moment again and again, the weight of him slamming into her, the way his teeth found their mark in the darkness, the growl that seemed to come from the earth itself, and the sudden, shocking stillness that followed. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel the tremor in his body, the raggedness of his breathing, the warmth of his muzzle pressed against her cheek as if he was saying, "It's over now. I've got you." But things were far from over. The man Shadow had stopped was in the hospital under police guard. His name, they now knew, was Nathan Grady, wanted in 3 states for a string of assaults, suspected in 2 unsolved disappearances, and somehow still walking free until that night. It was chilling to think that if Shadow hadn't been there, she might have been another name in a cold case file. Detective Harris, a tall man with eyes like weathered steel, came to take her statement. He didn't sugarcoat it. "You were lucky," he said quietly. "Too lucky. If that dog hadn't acted when he did, you wouldn't be sitting here right now." His gaze shifted to Shadow, lying on the floor with his head on his paws, ears half lowered but eyes tracking every movement in the room. "That's not just instinct," Harris added. "That's something else." Her recovery wasn't just physical. Nightmares came often, and sometimes she would wake in the deep hours before dawn, heart hammering, convinced she could hear footsteps outside. Every time, Shadow was there. Sometimes she woke to find him sitting at the foot of the bed, staring at the door, his ears pricked forward, body tense, as if daring the world to try again. Other times he would crawl closer, resting his head against her legs, the weight of him grounding her back into reality. Slowly, his presence began to knit her back together. He didn't flinch when she cried. He didn't rush her when she was silent. He simply stayed. The public wanted the full story, but telling it felt like opening a wound that had just started to close. And yet, one afternoon, standing in the quiet of the small park where she had first met Shadow, she decided to share. A local reporter had asked for an interview, promising it would focus on the heroism of the dog, not the details of the attack. She agreed, on one condition: that they tell it exactly as it happened. No sensationalism, no twisting for views, just the truth. When the piece aired, it went beyond anything she had imagined. It wasn't just the town that took notice, it spread across the country. Messages poured in from people who had been saved by their dogs, from soldiers who spoke of canine partners who had shielded them from harm, from parents whose children had been found safe because of a family pet's intuition. And in the flood of messages, one caught her breath: an email from a retired police canine handler named Mark Ellis. His words were simple but heavy with meaning. "I think I know your dog." Mark arrived 2 days later, a man in his 60s with a limp and a gaze that seemed to carry too many years. The moment Shadow saw him, something changed. His ears perked, his tail gave a slow, uncertain wag, and he stepped forward, sniffing the air as if searching for a memory. Mark knelt down, calling a name softly: "Axel." Shadow froze. His body went still except for the trembling in his legs. Then, as if a dam had broken, he pressed forward, burying his head against the man's chest with a low, keening sound that tore through the air like a whisper from another life. Mark's voice was thick when he explained. Shadow, Axel, had once been a decorated police canine, his partner in dozens of high-risk arrests. 3 years ago, during a raid gone wrong, Axel had been injured while dragging Mark out of gunfire. When Mark woke up in the hospital weeks later, he was told Axel hadn't survived. But the truth was murkier. Budget cuts, a sudden departmental reorganization, and questionable paperwork had led to the dog being quietly sold off instead of retired properly. Mark had tried to find him, but every lead went cold. Until now. The revelation hit her like a punch and a gift at once. Shadow wasn't just a stray who had wandered into her life. He was a warrior, cast aside by a system that should have honored him. And now, against all odds, he had found his way back into the fight, not for the law, but for her. But the truth brought trouble. When the department's old brass caught wind of the story going viral, they panicked. Questions were being asked about missing canine records, misuse of funds, and illegal sales of retired service dogs. Shadow had become living evidence in a case that could end careers. Anonymous threats began to appear in her mailbox. Someone tried to break into her house while she was at work, but the locked door and Shadow's furious barking sent them running. It was clear. Whoever had profited from Axel's disappearance wanted to silence both of them. Mark refused to leave her side. "They don't scare easy," he warned. "But neither do we." Together, they gathered proof: old vet records, training certificates, even a grainy photo of Axel in uniform. his eyes the same fierce amber that stared back at her now. With Detective Harris' help, they handed everything to an investigative journalist who wasn't afraid to dig deep. The more the reporter uncovered, the bigger the story became. It wasn't just Axel. Dozens of retired K-9s had been sold, lost, or vanished without explanation. The final confrontation came quietly, almost anticlimactically. One of the men behind the scheme, an ex-supervisor with too many connections, was arrested at his home. Others followed, and when the dust settled, laws began to change. New protections were written for service animals, ensuring they would never again be discarded like broken tools. Through it all, Shadow never left her. On the night the last arrest was made, she sat on the porch with him, the cool air wrapping around them. She rested her hand on his fur, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. "You were never just a dog," she whispered. "You were my miracle, my family, my protector, and now, you're home." His tail thumped once, and in his eyes, she saw the unshakable truth, that he had chosen her, and no matter where the world tried to pull them, they would face it together. The sun had already set when the small town gathered at the park for what the mayor had simply called a night of gratitude. Fairy lights strung from tree to tree swayed in the evening breeze, casting warm, golden halos on the faces of neighbors, friends, and strangers who had all come to hear one story, the story of a dog who had changed everything. Emma stood at the center of the crowd, her hand resting gently on the head of her German shepherd, Shadow. He sat proudly beside her, chest high, eyes scanning the crowd with that familiar alertness. A bandage still wrapped his side where the wound had been stitched, but his spirit radiated through him like a beacon. For a moment, Emma didn't speak. She just looked around at the faces, the firefighters who had pulled them both from the water, the shelter volunteers who had first taken Shadow in, the old man from the bakery who had been leaving scraps behind the shop for the strays for years, hoping they'd survive another night. She even spotted the little girl from down the street who had been terrified of dogs, now holding a hand-painted sign that said in big, wobbly letters, "Thank you, Shadow." Emma took a breath. "The night I met Shadow," she began, her voice steady but heavy with emotion, "I didn't know I was meeting my reason to keep going. I was, at the lowest place I've ever been. I'd lost things I didn't think I could survive losing. And then this dog, broken, scared, forgotten, trusted me enough to let me carry him away from danger. I thought I was rescuing him, but he was rescuing me." A hush swept over the crowd. Even the children stood still. She told them about the flood, about the moment she'd seen Shadow chained in the freezing water, about the way his eyes had locked with hers like they had already known each other a lifetime. She told them about the slow days of recovery, the nights she sat awake because his nightmares woke him, and hers kept her from sleeping. How, in the quiet, she realized that they weren't just healing side by side, they were teaching each other how to live again. Shadow's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, his tail giving one slow, steady wag. Emma smiled down at him before looking back at the crowd. "This isn't just a story about a dog. This is a story about hope. It's about what happens when we refuse to give up on each other, or ourselves." The mayor stepped forward, placing a ribbon around Shadow's neck, a small medal with the words, "For bravery beyond measure," engraved in gold. The crowd erupted in applause, but Shadow didn't seem to care about the attention. He only leaned closer into Emma's leg, as if to remind her that this moment, like every moment since that night, was something they were sharing together. Later, after the speeches and the laughter and the music faded, Emma walked with Shadow to the quiet hill overlooking the town. The lights below glittered like stars. Shadow lay beside her in the grass, his warm body pressed to hers. She rested her head against him, fingers curling into his fur. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she whispered. The dog didn't answer, but he didn't have to. His steady breathing, the rise and fall of his chest against her, the soft weight of his paw resting over her ankle, it was all the answer she needed. In the end, the world wouldn't remember every detail of their story, but for Emma, and for Shadow, the truth was simple. They had saved each other, and sometimes, that was all that mattered. Far below, a wind carried the last echoes of applause through the town, but up on the hill, under a sky full of quiet stars, a woman and her dog simply sat together, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two souls who had finally found home.
If this tale moved you, if you felt the tension, the heartbreak, and the triumph, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more thrilling, emotional, and inspiring stories your way. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Do you believe dogs have an extraordinary sixth sense? Share your thoughts and personal stories with us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.